In ancient Europe, childbearing was considered a primary duty of women, especially for members of the royal family who needed to produce healthy heirs and expand the dynasty. According to European laws of succession, bloodline was the most crucial and fundamental basis for inheritance rights. Typically, royal families feared extinction through lack of an heir more than being overthrown. Women who married into the royal family bore the significant responsibility of childbirth. Due to the prevalent practice of monogamy in Europe, only children born to the legitimate wife were considered lawful heirs, thus placing almost all the responsibility on the queen or the king's official spouse. While in the Catholic understanding of marriage, childlessness is not considered a valid reason for divorce due to the pressures of succession, most women unable to produce an heir were abandoned by their husbands for various reasons. If you think being abandoned and spending a lifetime in a convent is tragic, consider this. The true human tragedy was the fertile women in royal families who were expected to continuously bear children. In Europe, up until modern times, at least 1/3 of women could not escape the perilous cycle of repeated childbirths. Many of these women spent nearly every year of their marriage pregnant until they lost the ability to bear children, their husbands died, or they were no longer required to fulfill the duty of childbirth. In addition to other challenges, royal childbirth also involved many practices that might seem suffocating today, but at the time, these protocols were strictly enforced to ensure the successful delivery of royal heirs. For most families, pregnancy and childbirth are very private matters, but for royal women, there was almost no privacy during the entire process. Over the past centuries, even queens, queens consort, and princesses who had access to the top medical experts of their time typically only learned of their pregnancies between 4 to 6 months into the term. This was because, in the Middle Ages, there were no modern pregnancy tests, and many symptoms related to pregnancy were often mistaken for common illnesses or discomforts. However, once a royal pregnancy was confirmed, the related birth plans would be immediately initiated, and all associated celebrations and ceremonies would be arranged prior to the delivery. In 15th century England, there was a royal book that outlined what should be done before the childbirth of royal women. Even if the pregnant woman was in pain or discomfort, she had to adhere to the established procedures. Greenwich Palace was bustling in 1533 because Queen Anne Boleyn was preparing to give birth to the future Elizabeth I. As per tradition, about a month before the due date, the expectant mother would attend a special mass where the priest would ask for blessings for the childbirth. After this, she would retreat from public view and even from other members of the royal family in a period known as lying in. The intense public interest in royal births is not surprising. After all, there were often significant stakes involved. When a queen bore a daughter instead of a son, wars could be sparked, and any instability in succession could lead to bloody dynastic conflicts, with both nobles and commoners drafted into battle. This notion of turning royal births into a public spectacle was most extensively promoted in France. Starting from the 17th century Bourbon dynasty, French queens or crown princesses were subjected to the significant trial of public childbirth. This meant that they had to give birth in the presence of many royal family members and nobles, with the crucial procedure being the cutting of the umbilical cord in full view. This practice was to ensure that the child was indeed born of the queen, preventing any covert substitution and thus safeguarding the royal bloodline from any interference. You might wonder how it could be ensured that the child's father was truly the king, considering the possibility that the queen might have been unfaithful. It can only be said that the French were very confident in their royal order and the king's virility. French queens had almost no privacy. Even their restroom visits were attended by a maid holding toilet paper, and the first act upon waking was for the royal physician to examine the morning urine to check for signs of pregnancy and general health. If the king and queen were intimate, it would certainly be the headline news of the palace the next day. In summary, the French believed that if there was any illegitimacy in the lineage of the heir to the throne, it could only be attributed to the queen. The earliest record of public childbirth traces back to Marie de Medici, the second wife of Henry IV. Marie de Medici was Henry IV's second wife because his first wife, Margot, could not bear children, prompting Henry to divorce and remarry. At that time, France had just recovered from 30 years of civil war, and the entire nation eagerly hoped that the king's second wife could give birth to a prince. The birth of a prince symbolized order and stability, and would definitively quash any rebellious intentions harbored by the princes eyeing the throne. To legitimize his son further, and perhaps as a dubious strategy conceived by someone, it was arranged for Queen Marie de Medici to give birth in the presence of the princes. Henry IV agreed to this, and historical records note that on the eve of the birth, Henry said to Marie, "My friend, I must tell you that this child must be born in the presence of the princes." Subsequently, historical records repeatedly emphasize Henry's insistence on the importance of public childbirth for national stability. Poor Marie de Medici thus became the first queen to give birth in public. On September 27, 1601, under the watchful eyes of a circle of noble lords, she delivered a healthy baby boy. Henry IV was overjoyed and held his son high above his head, exclaiming, "This child belongs to the people." These were the last words Marie de Medici heard before she fainted from exhaustion. This custom was maintained for nearly 2 centuries, and most queens and crown princesses resigned themselves to this fate. However, there were some clever exceptions, like Maria Josefa of Saxony, the German daughter-in-law of Louis XV. She successfully concealed the news of her impending labor, interacting and laughing with people as usual. Only after her water broke did she quietly retreat to a seldom-used room, calling for the doctor and midwife. By the time everyone learned of her labor, she had already given birth successfully. Even her husband rushed over, shouting as he ran, "My wife is giving birth. Come see my wife giving birth." When he arrived, he found his wife holding their newly born son. The clever Josephine had kept the umbilical cord uncut, avoiding the embarrassment of being watched and ensuring the child's identity was confirmed. During the reign of Louis XVI, Queen Marie Antoinette's first childbirth saw her nearby rooms packed with princes, nobles, and high-ranking officials 8 days prior, all laying out sleeping mats in anticipation of her imminent labor. When the queen finally went into labor, she was tightly surrounded by nearly 200 people, nearly suffocating, with some even climbing on cupboards to witness her childbirth. When the queen struggled to breathe, Louis XVI, tall and strong at 190 centimeters, became annoyed, personally dispersed the crowd, and opened the windows. For Marie Antoinette's subsequent deliveries, the compassionate Louis gradually phased out this public birthing ceremony. The number of onlookers was reduced to 10 during her second delivery, and eventually the ceremony was abolished altogether. Even today, royal childbirth remains a national event in European monarchies, with a complete set of protocols specifically designed for the delivery of important royal family members and the birth of heirs. After giving birth, royal women are often compelled to appear before the public with a professional smile under the spotlight, as if they were still serving their country by producing an heir. In times when surgical medical technology was severely limited, emphasis was placed on religious ceremonies, believing that a woman's ability to deliver safely depended largely on strict adherence to religious norms and her devoutness. Before a royal childbirth, churches throughout the nation would sing the Te Deum and hold various religious ceremonies to pray for a smooth delivery. The room used for childbirth would be meticulously prepared, with walls covered in calming tapestries depicting scenes and landscapes from the Bible, designed to soothe the mother's emotions. Images of animals or people were strictly prohibited in the delivery room, as it was believed that such sights could frighten the expectant mother, potentially leading to hallucinations and birth defects, including physical deformities. Sometimes a false ceiling would be installed above the bed to create a more comfortable, enclosed space, intentionally evoking the womb to enhance feelings of relaxation and comfort. Fresh air and natural light were considered harmful rather than beneficial. Therefore, if there were any windows in the delivery room, they would remain covered until after the child was born. Only candles were allowed to be lit inside, as any bit of natural sunlight could harm the expectant mother's eyes. More importantly, the room's fireplace would be kept burning continuously, even in summer, to ensure the room remained warm. Everyone in the room was required to keep their voices low, with only whispers allowed. The month before childbirth was considered extremely important, particularly because even the most skilled royal physicians believed that a child's gender was determined in the month before birth. Consequently, every effort was made to ensure that the baby would be a boy. This is why various biblical scenes were hung in the delivery room. It was believed that the mother's thoughts could influence the gender of the child. Scenes from the Bible, such as the birth of Jesus, were thought to help the mother believe that she could give birth to a son. Until the mid-17th century, obstetricians were rare, and childbirth was mainly managed by midwives, a role exclusively held by women. Midwives, as childbirth specialists, had to be knowledgeable and of good character. There were concerns that items such as the umbilical cord or placenta might be secretly taken from the room to be sold or used in witchcraft potions, so midwives had to swear not to remove anything from the room, a reasonable fear in an era when witchcraft was widely feared. Women often held relics or recited religious prayers and hymns to aid the birthing process. Amulets and amber could be placed on the mother's belly or prayer scrolls read, as these religious rituals were considered crucial for the mother's well-being. The child's father, often the king, usually did not participate directly in the childbirth process, but there were exceptions. For example, Louis XIV once rolled up his sleeves to assist the doctors during the difficult labor of his wife, Queen Marie-Thérèse. Moreover, the king was considerately present throughout his wife's labor every time she gave birth. Prince Albert, the husband of Queen Victoria of Britain, also provided encouragement during her childbirths. The Queen emotionally wrote that there was no nurse kinder, wiser, or more judicious than her beloved husband. Yet the ordeal for the royal women did not end with the birth of the child. Especially during the Tudor era, there was a strong emphasis on the concept of churching, which was about ensuring that the queen or princess was both physically and spiritually prepared to leave her confinement and re-enter court life. Similar to modern postpartum care, this final stage could take 4 to 6 weeks, undoubtedly a tedious and frustrating period for a new mother, particularly as she would be separated from her newborn. During this time, the new mother was expected to rest in bed, and she also needed to engage in regular prayers. This was particularly true in 15th and 16th century England, where it was widely believed that women were unclean after childbirth. Thus, queens or princesses needed to be churched before they could return to the royal fold. This notion of cleansing royal women postpartum was not confined to the medieval and Tudor periods. Even Queen Victoria was required to undergo a month-long rest after childbirth, during which she needed to receive blessings and purification from a clergyman. Obstetric technology did not significantly advance until the late 19th century, and before then, women had to endure very primitive childbirth processes. Queen Victoria, despite being dutiful in fulfilling her royal duties of childbirth, actually disliked the process immensely, a sentiment completely understandable as frequent childbirths can be quite taxing. Only women can truly appreciate the toll that childbirth takes on one's health. Even today, women continue to experience the physical transformations brought on by pregnancy and postpartum effects, let alone in an era when surgical techniques were rudimentary. In European history, the pain experienced during childbirth was considered necessary. Indeed, it was believed that a woman must endure this pain. In the Middle Ages, providing effective pain relief during childbirth was viewed as unnatural and contrary to God's will, especially in royal births. After all, the Bible states, "In pain you shall bring forth children." Thus, any potential pain relief measures during childbirth, including alcohol and other natural anesthetics, were strictly prohibited. Indeed, there's a notable case from 1591 where a high-status woman was reportedly burned at the stake for recklessly demanding pain relief during a difficult twin birth. Even into the 19th century, as the use of chloroform and ether became commonplace in surgical procedures, the pain of childbirth was still seen as something to be endured and even eagerly anticipated, especially for royal and noble women. It wasn't until 1853 that attitudes began to change regarding pain relief during childbirth. Queen Victoria is often stereotyped as a temperamental, rigid, and extremely conservative elderly woman, a perception that might be true for her later years. However, it was this very monarch who revolutionized royal childbirth practices. Today's queens and princesses can thank her for breaking the centuries-old tradition of viewing pain during childbirth as a noble and beautiful ordeal. During her own labor, Queen Victoria asked Dr. John Snow for help, and a cloth soaked in chloroform was placed over her mouth, effectively alleviating her pain. After the birth, Queen Victoria didn't keep this a secret. Instead, she openly praised the analgesic. Over the past centuries, childbirth was not only excruciating, but could also be fatal. Royal women faced the risk of childbirth more than just once or twice. Since the Middle Ages, European royalty usually married between the ages of 15 and 19, with the optimal childbearing age for young women being between 20 and 24. Since newborns were cared for by wet nurses, a royal woman, even a queen, hardly had a real break from childbearing. In fact, during the Renaissance, the average number of children born to royal women was about 6, assuming they lived long enough to have that many. The risks associated with childbirth were so significant that royal women were advised to write a will and typically arrange their affairs as soon as they learned they were pregnant. Despite receiving the best medical care available at the time, many royal women died in childbirth, particularly from bacterial infections or puerperal fever. Today, such deaths are largely preventable, which makes them all the more tragic. No class of women could live easily under a patriarchal society, not even those at the very top of the social pyramid. They were inevitably reduced to mere vehicles for passing on lineage.